The real God of the Jews, known as Yahweh, is a central figure in the religion of Judaism. Yahweh is considered the one and only God, and his name is often translated as, I am who I am. In Jewish tradition, the name of Yahweh is so sacred that it is often not spoken aloud and is substituted with terms like Adonai, meaning Lord. This video holds the most unexpected revelations about the nature of the sovereign Hebrew tradition about God and his origin, aided by the work of Francesca Stravrakopoulou. You can't afford to not stay till the end. Yahweh's origin is deeply rooted in the ancient Israelite religion and is believed to have been revealed to Moses in the burning bush, as described in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament. The manifestations of Yahweh in the physical realm are depicted in various ways in religious texts and traditions. In the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh is depicted as a powerful and transcendent deity who interacts with humans through visions, dreams, and manifestations. The accounts of Yahweh's physical manifestations include the burning bush, the pillar of cloud and fire, and the voice from the heavens. While Yahweh is often described in anthropomorphic terms, with human-like qualities such as a face, arms, and eyes, it is important to note that these descriptions are meant to convey the divine nature of Yahweh in a way that humans can comprehend. Yahweh's physical manifestations are also symbolically represented through various images and symbols in Jewish religious art and iconography. These representations serve as visual reminders of Yahweh's presence and influence in the lives of believers. In Jewish theology, Yahweh's presence is believed to be everywhere and can manifest in the physical realm through acts of providence, miracles, and divine intervention. According to the book God and Anatomy by Francesca Stravrakopoulou, Yahweh is the name of the ancient Israelite God, originally envisioned as having a male body with superhuman powers and earthly passions. The book explores the biblical and archaeological evidence for Yahweh's physicality and how later writers and editors gradually erased or reinterpreted it. Francesca Stravrakopoulou is a British biblical scholar and broadcaster, currently a professor of the Hebrew Bible and ancient religion at the University of Exeter. She is an atheist, but is also interested in the history and culture of ancient Israel and Judah and how they shaped the biblical texts. The first section of the book, titled Dissecting the Divine, is one of the most fascinating and provocative parts of the book, as it examines the different aspects of God's body, such as his head, face, eyes, mouth, hands, feet, heart, genitals, and blood. It also discusses how God's body was related to his divine attributes, such as wisdom, power, anger, love, sexuality, and violence. The section also analyzes how God's body was represented in various forms of worship, such as sacrifices, rituals, images, and temples. God, or Yahweh, as he was initially known, was not the perfect, abstract, immaterial being that most people imagine today, but rather a physical, passionate, and sometimes flawed deity with a male body with superhuman powers and earthly desires. Biblical and archaeological evidence reveals that Yahweh was once a minor storm god who later became the supreme God of Israel and Judah, and how his physicality was gradually erased or reinterpreted by later writers and editors influenced by other cultures and ideologies. Well, don't take my word for it. Francesca uses a variety of sources and methods to support her claims, such as ancient texts, inscriptions, artifacts, iconography, linguistics, and literary analysis. She also engages with the latest scholarship and debates in biblical studies and presents her arguments in a clear, accessible, and engaging way. This is why the book is a must-read. Francesca does not shy away from controversial or sensitive topics, such as God's sexuality, violence, or emotions, but she also treats them with respect and nuance. She challenges us to question our assumptions and prejudices and appreciate the diversity and complexity of ancient religious traditions about God. Agreed that God cannot be seen, because whoever sees the face of God does not live to tell it. However, some people had close encounters with the presence of God. Some of them are Adam and Eve. They were the first humans created by God and lived in the Garden of Eden. They communicated directly with God until they disobeyed him and ate from the forbidden tree. God then banished them from the garden and cursed them with mortality and pain. They had their first physical contact with El, or Yahweh, when he walked through the garden in the cool of the evening. The subsequent encounter is with Enoch. He was the seventh generation of Adam and the father of Methuselah. He walked faithfully with God for 300 years, and then he was taken away by God without dying. He is one of the few people in the Bible who did not experience death. Genesis 5 verses 21 to 24. Moses also had many encounters with God, such as the burning bush, the plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, the giving of the law, and the glory of God on Mount Sinai. He spoke to God as a friend spoke to a friend and saw God's back but not his face. Exodus 3 to 34. God didn't show him his face probably because he didn't want Moses to fall and die mysteriously, as nobody can behold God's face and live. Elijah also personally encountered God on Mount Horeb, where he heard God's still small voice. He was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind without dying. The Virgin Mary also had a close contact. She was visited by the angel Gabriel, who announced the miraculous conception of Jesus by the Holy Spirit. She also witnessed many events in Jesus' life, such as his birth, ministry, death, and resurrection. She was a faithful follower of Jesus and a member of the early church. There are many more, such as Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Samuel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Peter, Paul, John, and others. They all had different experiences with God, but shared a common faith in him and a desire to know and serve him. In Francesca's book, the section titled God's CV discusses the name, gender, family, and death of God. In this section, she explores how the ancient Israelites and Judahites understood and expressed the identity and character of their God, Yahweh. Yahweh was not always the only God, supreme God, or the universal God, but rather a local and tribal God, with a complex and changing relationship with other gods and goddesses, especially his wife Asherah. More on her later. Yahweh's name, which was originally a personal and sacred name, became a generic and profane name. Other titles and epithets such as El, Elohim, Adonai, and the Lord replaced it. Yahweh's gender, which was predominantly masculine but also occasionally feminine, was influenced by the cultural and political contexts of the biblical world and how it affected the roles and status of women and men in ancient Israel and Judah. Yahweh's family, which included his parents, siblings, children, and consort, was gradually reduced or eliminated by the biblical writers and editors who wanted to present Yahweh as a solitary and sovereign God with no rivals or partners. What you'd assume is the most bizarre of all is the death of Yahweh, as described by the book. Yahweh's death, a possibility and a reality in some ancient traditions, was denied or reinterpreted by the biblical authors, who wanted to affirm Yahweh's immortality and eternity. In this section, Stravrakopoulou challenges God's conventional and popular views and presents a different and diverse picture of God based on historical and archaeological evidence. The book does not intend to offend or undermine the tenets of Christianity, but rather to inform and enlighten us about the origins and development of the idea of God and how it relates to the origins and development of Western culture. Yahweh and El were originally two distinct deities, as discussed before. Yahweh was the name of a minor storm god who was worshipped by the Midianites, Kenites, and Edomites, and was introduced to the Israelites by Moses at Mount Sinai. Exodus 3 verse 13 says, "And Moses said unto God, Behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, The God of your fathers hath sent me unto you, and they shall say to me, What is his name? What shall I say unto them?" El was the name of the supreme god of the Canaanites, the father and creator of the gods and humans, and who was associated with wisdom, justice, and fertility. He was also called Elohim, which means God or gods in Hebrew. During an era of religious syncretism, it became accepted among the Israelite people to consider the Canaanite god El to be the same as Yahweh. El was soon thought to have always been the same deity as Yahweh, as evidenced by the book of Exodus. The biblical and archaeological evidence reveals that Yahweh and El had different attributes, names, symbols, and cults. They were sometimes worshipped together or separately by the Israelites and Judahites. For example, Yahweh was often depicted as a warrior, king, judge, and shepherd. His symbols included the bull, the cherubim, the serpent, and the fire. El was often depicted as an old man, a patriarch, a sage, and a benefactor, and his symbols included the bull, the oak, the ram, and the star. Yahweh's cult was centered in Jerusalem, while El's was widespread in the high places and the countryside. Similarly, other traditions explain Yahweh and El were always the same deity. Yahweh was the name of the God of Israel, who revealed himself to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and made a covenant with them and their descendants. El was not the name of a separate deity, but a title of Yahweh, meaning God or the God. It was often combined with other words or epithets to describe Yahweh's character and attributes, such as El Shaddai, God Almighty, El Elyon, God Most High, El Olam, God Everlasting, El Roy, God Who Sees, and El Elohe Israel, God the God of Israel. Genesis 17 verse 1. Biblical and archaeological evidence shows that the Israelites and Judahites always worshipped Yahweh and El as the same God, and shared the same attributes, names, symbols, and cults. As you can see, the relationship between Yahweh and El in Judaism is not simple or straightforward, but rather complex and controversial. It reflects the Israelite religion's historical and theological diversity and development, and its interaction with other ancient Near Eastern cultures. Stavrakopoulou's exploration in God and anatomy navigates the intricate terrain of religious symbolism, particularly the representations of divine figures like Yahweh. Within the section Footloose, she delves into the depiction of Yahweh's genitals, examining how various religious narratives and symbolic interpretations associate phallic masculinity with aspects of power, creation, and symbolism. This exploration isn't merely anatomical, but dives deep into the cultural and symbolic significance attributed to the phallus within religious contexts. Stavrakopoulou probes how these representations of genitalia are intricately woven into religious narratives, shaping perceptions of divinity and offering insights into ancient societal beliefs and values. By now, you must have gotten the hint of where this narrative is going. Phallus, divine penis, genitals. It is exactly what you think. Yahweh had a wife, often depicted in narratives such as the fall of the Queen of Heaven as Asherah. According to some sources, Asherah was an ancient West Semitic goddess considered the consort of the supreme god El or Yahweh. Some scholars have suggested that the Israelites worshipped Asherah alongside Yahweh, and that she was represented by wooden poles or statues called Asherim. However, this view is controversial and not accepted by all biblical scholars. But Francesca's assertions on this topic are so precise that you'll see the oasis of factuality in it. To understand the nature, attributes, and personality of the true God of the Jews, we make comparisons with the mythical monster of the Mesopotamian tradition known as Humbaba or Humbawa. This was a mythical creature in the Epic of Gilgamesh, a Mesopotamian poem that is one of the oldest surviving works of literature. Humbaba was the guardian of the cedar forest where the gods lived. He had a terrifying appearance, with a lion's head, an eagle's talons, and a mouth of fire. He was also mighty, and could hear any sound in the cedar forest, or forest of the gods, where Humbaba was put in charge of guarding against human penetration. Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, and his friend Enkidu, a wild man, decided to go to the cedar forest and kill Humbaba to gain fame and glory. They were aided by the sun god Shamash, who gave them advice and protection. After a long and fierce battle, they defeated Humbaba, who begged for mercy and offered to serve them. However, Gilgamesh refused to spare him and cut off his head. Some interpretations of this story suggest that Humbaba represents the forces of nature and chaos, while Gilgamesh and Enkidu represent the forces of civilization and order. By killing Humbaba, they assert their dominance over nature and claim its resources for themselves. However, this act also angers the gods, especially Enlil, the god of wind and Humbaba's master, who punishes them by sending the bull of heaven and later causing Enkidu's death. Note the bull here, signifying the strength of divinity, Yahweh or El, who slaughtered the fearsome Gilgamesh. Another section of God and Anatomy is titled God's Inside Out, the 9th chapter of Francesca's book. In this chapter, she explores the biblical and ancient Near Eastern evidence for God's internal organs, such as his heart, kidneys, bowels, and womb. These organs reveal God's qualities, such as his emotions, wisdom, justice, and creativity. God's heart is the seat of his emotions, such as love, anger, joy, and sorrow. It also reflects his will and plans. The biblical writers often use the metaphor of God's heart to express his relationship with his people and his expectations of them. God's kidneys are the source of his insight and discernment. They are also associated with his moral judgment and testing. The biblical writers use the term kidneys to refer to a person's innermost parts, where God can see and evaluate their thoughts and intentions. God's bowels are the site of his compassion and mercy. They are also linked to his covenant loyalty and faithfulness. The biblical writers use the term bowels to describe the visceral feelings God and his people have for each other, especially in times of distress and suffering. God's womb is the symbol of his creative power and generativity. It is also related to his nurturing and protective care. The biblical writers use the image of God's womb to portray his role as the creator and sustainer of life, as well as his maternal love and concern for his children. God's hands are seen as the instruments of his power and authority, as well as his communication and revelation. This reifies the biblical and ancient Near Eastern evidence for God's writing, sealing, and opening of books, scrolls, and tablets, and how these actions expressed his will and knowledge. God's face is understood as the manifestation of his presence and glory, as well as his emotions and intentions. The author analyzes the biblical and ancient Near Eastern data for God's facial expressions, gestures, and movements, and how they affected his relationship with his people and other beings. For example, Moses couldn't see his face because of the radiant light that emanated therefrom. Thereafter, God reveals his back to Moses in a fad. In human context, when one turns their back on you, it shows they are not pleased or that you messed up badly. They cannot stand you, so they turn their backs on you. But this cannot be said of Yahweh. His turned back against Moses signifies that he valued Moses so much he had to reveal a part of himself to him. Since Moses couldn't behold God's face, he had to show him his behind. There are many reasons God cannot reveal his face to mortals, one of which is that God's head is regarded as the symbol of his sovereignty and strength, as well as his beauty and radiance. In the book, Francesca delved deeper, surveying the biblical and ancient Near Eastern sources for God's hair, beard, crown, and horns, and how they represented his status and attributes. God's senses and sensitivity are conceived as the means of his perception and interaction, as well as his pleasure and displeasure. God can feel, hear, smell, just like we do, only on a grander scale than ours. God's eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and tongue all reflect his involvement and judgment in the affairs of men since we were made in his image. It is clear enough now that the real God of the Bible was an ancient Levantine deity, whose body revealed his complex and dynamic personality, and his intimate and interactive involvement with his creation. God's body challenges the conventional notions of gender and sexuality, as he displays both masculine and feminine traits, though he is widely considered masculine with accompanying male features. What do you think about this video? Kindly share it in the comments section below. And do not forget to like and subscribe to my channel to keep seeing more revelational content like this.